Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me today for a layout that I made for Mixed Media Mayhem. In Mixed Media Mayhem, we have been taking an inspiration piece and then creating a layout of our own based on that original. This week, I got to choose the inspiration piece and I chose this layout from Suzanne Rose Art. Now, this isn't a scrapbooking layout, this is an art journal layout. And I am going to link Suzanne Rose Art's channel in the description box. If you haven't already watched her channel, she makes beautiful pages. And whether you're making an art journal or a scrapbooking page, I really think that she's quite inspirational. So I started out with a number of different crayons. I'm using Vicki Boutin crayons, and I'm also using some distress crayons. I used a circle cutter, the Creative Memories large circle cutter, and I just use that to get the general idea of a circle. I'm scribbling some of the crayons on the background. I'm mainly using the Vicki Boutin crayons for the green and the distress crayons for the purple. I have a tiny touch of orange in there. I end up adding more orange later on. I didn't add more because I was afraid that it would mix together with the purple and then it would look a little bit too muddy for this layout. So I absolutely love the colors in the original, but I wanted to do something different. So I decided that I was going to make a Halloween layout. So I'm using those traditional Halloween colors, purple, green, and orange. I scribble the crayon in a couple of different areas, and I use more than one of each color. So I have two different greens and two different purples, and then I spray some water on top, and then I use my paintbrush to move the color and the water around a little bit. Right now, the green and purple areas just look like big patches of color, but I think that that changes and improves a little bit as the layout progresses. You could see that I put on several layers of each of the colors. I just think that the layers of color on top of each other helps to make the color deeper and richer. And occasionally I will leave some of the footage in, but I cut out most of when I'm drying the layout, and I do use my heat tool. You could see it in the upper right hand corner. I use it quite frequently to dry the layers of color. This helps to set a layer, and then when you put more color on top of it, then you have a second layer of color, and I like the way that builds up the color. The Vicki Boutin crayons don't seem to be marked individually with different names of colors, but there were two packs that I bought. I bought the warm colors and the cool colors, and I'm using some of the crayons from both of those. The distress crayons that I'm using are Wilted Violet and Seedless Preserves. And these two types of crayons, they're very similar. I feel that the distress crayons are a little bit softer, but the Vicki Boutins are really easy to work with as well. And here I'm using the Vicki Boutin crayons in orange, and I'm kind of making a halo around the outside of the area of color that I've already made. And in the end, all the colors kind of blend together, although I think you could still see that orangey halo in the finished product. As I go along, I try to add some splatters in each of the colors. I'm just tapping on the brush and trying to knock some of the color off the brush and onto the background. I will go back in later on and add some splatters using some sprays, but I thought that I would try doing it this way first. I also tried rubbing the crayon on the table and then adding water, hoping that I could make almost like a watercolor, and that didn't really work out so well. So later on, I decided the best use or the best way to make the splatters would be to just go ahead and use some sprays. I added some more color to the background and then I dried it very well. And now I'm using a wipe and an Echo Park stencil. This stencil is called Spider Cobwebs. This is it. It's not a baby wipe. It's an antibacterial hand wipe. I didn't have any baby wipes handy, but this worked just as well. I'm putting the stencil over the color, and then I'm using the wipe to lift up some of the color, and I just love the way that this looks. I love the way you could see the stencil so clearly, and it just adds, I think, a really cool texture to the areas of color. And first I did the larger areas of color, and then I made sure that I went in with the stencil and got those areas that were on the edge of the circle, of the wreath of color, I guess I could say. And now I'm going back in with the crayons and I'm adding a few spots of color that will be a little darker than what's already there. And instead of watering this down, I'm just applying the color and then smearing it with my finger. I do go back in though with the stencil again to give it the same texture as the rest of the layout, but I thought that it would look nice if there were a couple of darker areas. I always like when the color has a lot of variation in it, so I thought that I would just punch up a few little spots with some darker color. And then I do go back in with the stencil, and I don't lift off as much of the color in the dark areas because I don't want the dark areas to be lightened too much. And I had to be careful not to get carried away because I absolutely love to lift off the color like this. So I tried to restrain myself and leave some of those dark areas. I thoroughly dried the background, and then I went in with some splatters. I'm using some Tattered Angels Glimmer Mists. The green spray is called Forest Deep. I also use some purple spray that's called Purple Rain, and I'm going to use some orange spray, and the orange spray is called Orange Mint. I like the somewhat messy look that the sprays give the background. I think the sprays also help to transition the larger areas of color into the background. In this layout, the big kind of wreath of color was a little bit less sketchy than I guess I thought it was going to be because I was looking at the inspiration piece. And sometimes that just happens. I'm happy with the way that this turned out. It turned out different, much different from the technique that was used on the original, but I ended up being happy with it. And hopefully next time I will be able to achieve a slightly looser, like I said, more sketchy look, because I like to try different things out. I continue the technique of lifting up the color with the wipe through the stencil, and you might not be able to see it from looking at the video, but I'm not going into the areas that I've already used this technique on. I'm only rubbing the stencil with the wipe in places that I've added extra color. I think that if there was too much overlapping of the stencil, it might look a little messy. Now I'm adding some stamping to the background. I started off with a dot stamp that is a Stampin' Up rubber stamp. And when I choose where to put the stamping, I try to put it only on the areas that have color on them. Sometimes I'll overlap a little bit onto the white background, but for the most part, I am keeping the stamping to the areas of color. I have learned from experience that it doesn't look as good to me, in my opinion, to stamp on the white background. So you'll see with all the stamps that I use, they stay on the areas of color. I'm using some StazOn ink in Jet Black. This is an archival ink. This way, if I want to add any more water to the layout, the color won't run. I use a number of other stamps. I use a Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous stamp set called Faded Type, and that's the alphabet stamp that I used. I also use a Spellbinders stamp. It's called Spatter. That's the large rubber stamp. And then I use a grid stamp, and I think that's from Studio Calico. It's either Studio Calico or Tim Holtz. But if it's not Tim Holtz, he makes a similar stamp. Now I'm making some circles, and I don't have a circle stamp, so I'm just using some, I think one of them is a toilet paper roll, and the other one is from a roll of aluminum foil. And they're two different sizes, so I thought that that would look good. I dipped the end of the roll into some acrylic paint, and then I touched it to the layout. And in some cases, I put a little weight on one side or the other so that the circles wouldn't be complete, just to mix it up a little bit. And then since I had some black acrylic paint on my table, I added some water to it, and I made some splatters. But I wasn't sure if they were as large as the splatters that I get when I use my little bottle of watered down black acrylic paint. So I grabbed the bottle, it was handy, and I added some splatters using that as well, and they looked just like the other splatters. And then I added some white splatters as well, and this is watered down white acrylic paint. And I added a lot of the white splatters. There's a lot of dark stamping on the background now, so I thought that I would add some lighter areas with the white splatters. I also want to mention that before I added the acrylic paint, I used my Mink machine to flatten out the layout. It got very warped, and I find that the Mink machine is great for just flattening the paper back down again. I got that tip from watching a Paige Evans video, and I have been doing that nonstop now. I find that a very, very useful technique. I used a Stampendous Birds and Bones stamp set, and I stamped, I'm not sure if it's a crow or a raven. I don't know if I know the difference between those two birds when I see them, but in any case, I stamped an image of a bird, a blackbird, and I was really impressed with the crispness of the stamp. So I'm going to be using that on my layout. And you saw earlier that I fussy cut that bird out. And I left a white border because I wasn't sure if I needed it or not. I thought I could always cut it off later. So I found a piece of kind of metallic purple and black Halloween paper in my stash. So I gutted it because I know that I want to use some of that paper on the rest of the layout. But I mounted the piece of paper that I gutted on another piece of paper I knew I wouldn't use. I just find that it makes it much easier to work with those gutted pieces of paper than when they're a flimsy, like 1-inch frame. And then I trimmed down the mixed media background just a little bit. I just cut a little strip off of each side, and then I used a lot of ATG adhesive and attached that down to the background. I'm using a 4x6-inch photo. I matted on some white cardstock, and then I used that same pattern paper that I used in the background to make another mat for it. And this is a photo of both of my daughters. We went to Salem, Massachusetts, and every year that we've gone there in October, they always have the Addams family. So there are lots of people that are dressed in costume, and you can take photos with them, and they just have a tip jar out. So there are lots of photo opportunities, and there are some really great costumes, and it's pretty cool. So I really love going to Salem in October. It's a little bit like kitschy and a little bit corny, but I still really like it, and so do my kids. I decided to call this layout All in the Family. I thought of calling it The Addams Family, but I decided to use this title. It's another one of those shows that was really popular when I was a kid, so I was thinking that it kind of went with the topic, but it wasn't so expected. So I had a little bit of trouble with that bird. At some point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to use it, but it does end up on the layout. It moves around a little bit. And then I had a witch hat, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted to put it on the bird, but my daughter came in and she loved it. So I thought, no, I might as well leave it on there. It is kind of cute. I like that little hat. I moved it off momentarily, but that was before my daughter came in, and then she was like, oh, he needs like a hat or something. And I was like, oh, I have a hat right here. So it does make its way back onto his head. I'm also using these Me and My Big Ideas. They're called chips. They are sparkly chipboard bats, and I'm moving those around the layout. I'm trying to vary the types and the sizes of bats that I use. There was one type of bat that I ended up not really liking. It has its wings down, and I just felt like, I don't know, I didn't like the way that it looked, so I ended up taking those off the layout. I'm also adding in some small glitter, I think they're Recollections bats. I put 3 of those on the layout just to mix up the size a little bit. So now the bird is back where it started, and I remove those bats with their wings down, and I add a few other bats. And now I'm adding some Tim Holtz chipboard sentiments. I don't mind putting images on a layout that are only loosely related to the subject matter, but as far as the sentiments go, I really like those to fit my photo and the way that I'm viewing the page. So I looked through all of the Tim Holtz chipboard pack, and I found one that says Foolish Mortals, one that says Halloween, and one that says From Regions Beyond, and I thought that those fit this photo the best. Now I have all of my bats in place. I use some ATG adhesive to help them stick down to the page. I have a lot of mixed media on the background, so of course the stickers need a little bit of extra help sticking. I wanted to add something to the corners of the photo. I'm using a Martha Stewart corner punch, it is a spider web, and I'm sure that there is another part of this punch. I'm sure it's one of those punch around the page punches, but I only have the corner because I thought that it would make a perfect photo corner. So at first I cut them out of the purple paper, but then when I turned them over, I just liked the way the white looked, so I ended up using the white side for the photo corners. I'm going through my stash of purple, green, and orange jewels, and I add some different jewels to the layout. In the corners of the photo, I put some Joanne Park Lane really cool jewels that they had. They were like part purple and part black, and I liked that. It was almost like a marbled look. And then I'm using some other purple jewels. Some are stars and some are more just regular jewels. And then I use some very, very tiny orange jewels. These were made by Queen and Company. I really, really like the size of them. They're a little expensive, but I do think it's nice to have these on hand just to add a little bit of sparkle. And I think they have them in a clear color in some other less expensive brands, and I feel that those are pretty good to have on hand as well if you don't want to spend a lot of money buying all the different colors. And then I found in my stash that I had some green iridescent bubbles from Queen and Company, and I liked the way they were iridescent. I think that that added a nice little touch to the layout, so I scattered some of those in some different places on the layout. And I thought I might want to put the green jewels in the photo corners, but I ended up being happy with the purple ones. So that is the very last touch to this layout, and here are some close-ups. So although I'm really happy with the way this layout came out, it was definitely not the layout that I thought I was going to make when I first saw this inspiration piece. But of course, that's the beauty of an inspiration piece. You can take it very literally, or you can go in a different direction. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, everybody. For lots and lots of inspiration, please check out all of the channels of all the other scrapbookers who are making Mixed Media Mayhem layouts based on this beautiful original piece. I hope that everybody has a fantastic day, and I will see you again next week for another Mixed Media Mayhem. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.